sorry. I will cut this. I saw something.
I think you should leave it in.
What
Mistakes. You're like, it's time. No, it's really time.
Oh my God, we're live.
This is exactly how we should start it, Nathy. All right.
I will not
Go
get
ahead.
it. So, hey everyone, welcome back to There's a Workshop for That. If I had to name two key skills that every aspiring facilitator should work on, I'd say listening and asking the kind of questions that invite people to go deeper in their soul, to go deeper in their reflections. And today's guest is a total expert on both. I'm so excited to welcome Chad Littlefield to the show. He's the creator of the WeConnect cards, one of my absolute favorite card decks for sparking connection and engagement from the beginning of my sessions. And he's also the co-author of Ask Powerful Questions. And a few weeks ago, I posted about the book on LinkedIn. And Chad, you commented on my post. And if I may, I'd love to read what you wrote.
I would love to hear what my past self said. I don't remember.
So you wrote, intend for this to be a conversation that create matters rather than the subtitle of the book of simply creating conversations that matter. I just love that. But I admit I also had a little moment of panic thinking, oh my God, will my English be good enough to capture that kind of nuance in my interview? But here we are, and I'm ready to do my best to record an episode that really matters for the facilitators out there who are listening to us. Welcome, Chad. How are you?
Doing really well. Actually, this morning I was walking to my office and I'm in a bit of a stressful moment in life from big family move, but I was just feeling overwhelmed with joy on my walk here. And I think part of that had to do with knowing that we were going to chat. So, hello.
So nice. I'm very, very happy to have you here. I'm a big fan of your YouTube channel. And so I could tell a lot of lovely things about you, but I think I will do like all my guests. I will ask you, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and what brings you to the mission you have today?
Yeah. So I'll try to, I realized recently that I kind of did like a life reflection in review. And what I noticed is all these like big turning points in my life started with a single question or conversation. And so I kind of mapped my life and the trajectory and the path that I've been on by like the questions that I was asked or little conversations that I had. So I'll try to give a too long didn't read overview of that. Going back to the place where I was sure that I was going to be a doctor. I had seen a movie, Patch Adams, with Robin Williams, where he really became a doctor to promote the quality of life over quantity. And I was so struck by the way that he was able to actually heal people through human connection. And so he would walk into a terminally ill patient's room, and even the best clinicians, smartest doctors and nurses could not get this guy to eat. But Patch just had the most empathetic possible way of reaching him. And so I saw that movie and I was going to be a doctor. And then I took a chemistry class and was like, I'm going to be a doctor anymore. 10 years of this is not going to work out. But I was still, and I share that, I'm not going to tell you the whole story of my life, but I share that as a core, from the time I was quite young, there was this desire and intrigue and curiosity around, was that movie Hollywood, or is that a real thing? Can connection actually mend the world or bring people together in a very deep and healing sort of way? And then I kind of set off and studied that for 10 years. And spoiler alert, yes, there's a whole bunch of research to suggest. And even recently, Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, was asked by the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, in an interview, like, okay, if we just skip ahead 40 years and AI is doing much of what we're doing now, what are we left with? And Sam's response, super clearly, he had clearly thought about this very deeply, was two things: connection and recreation. And whether you whatever you think of that, I think it's interesting to ponder. This is some very essential element of our life. Anyway, now I run a company and started a company called We and Me. And because I feel that I exist on the planet, I actually am pretty darn sure that I exist on the planet to gently eradicate small talk and create conversations that matter. And so the way that I'm currently doing that is over the last 10 years, I've created this series of tools. You mentioned the WeConnect cards and co-wrote a book called Ask Powerful Questions with Will, another one called How to Make Virtual Engagement Easy. And so in some ways, in the last 10 years as a professional speaker and facilitator, I've been a professional arms uncrosser. So individuals, right, have at a company, the head of learning and development or head of HR has invited me in, or a conference organizer has invited me in to kick off an event with 2,500 people. So a lot of like big, interactive, large group facilitation keynotes. But everybody in that audience was just kind of forced to be there by their boss. And so I become a professional arms uncrosser, and I've gotten pretty good at it. But in my next decade, and where I'm kind of excited to chat here is what you alluded to in that intro. In the last 10 years, I think I've created a lot of conversations that have mattered to people and created a whole bunch of connections that otherwise wouldn't have existed. But in the next 10 years, I'm really keen and really focused on sparking conversations that actually create matter. And that idea being the questions you ask me today, Nathy, and the conversation that we have, but in particular, the questions are like an edit button for what happens next. Like quite literally, you're going to toss out a question and it will change what comes out of my mouth. And there's something really, really compelling to me about that idea that you have that power to be able to ask. And then I think longer term, the questions we ask also very much shape people's perspectives. To make a long story longer, my final piece here, I've shifted a little bit away from being the professional arms uncrosser and traveling to and hosting other people's events, and now hosting my own. And so really focused on this Connector Summit that I host every December virtually, and a couple other programs to bring like-minded facilitator, connector, communicator kind of people together. There you go.
Here we are. And I have a tricky question at first. And normally I don't say I have a question, but I have a question for you. Because I was, I was reading the book. It's here. Ask powerful question, create conversations that matter. And we will talk about this. But I was just wondering, you are so working on questions. You are a connector. You know how to start conversation. Can you share a time when a question that you asked didn't land the way you hoped?
Goodness. Yeah.
And what did you learn from this? Maybe it happened before the book, maybe even after the book. So I was just wondering, is Chad also face some situation where his question doesn't land?
Many times, probably many times in the last week. Sigh of relief. It turns out when you write a book on a thing and you introduce me as an expert, which I think is so funny because I'm an expert in nothing. And what I mean by that is I'm an expert in asking about things with the idea that I don't know anything. So I got to figure out things. And so I ask or attempt to. So yeah, and I think a couple specific times, one that is the most memorable, I'm not sure it's useful, but the most memorable piece of it, 12 years ago or so, I was invited to give a TEDx talk. My co-author, Will, really challenged and invited me and pushed me to think about the power of sharing and acknowledging your own failures on stage and highlighting and uplifting other people's successes. And so I shared the story. I was teaching at Penn State University, and I was walking across campus, and there was a girl that had a pretty bright lime green kind of jacket, winter jacket on. And there was a girl wearing a bright lime green winter jacket walking by. And I said, "Nice jacket. It's a nice color on us, isn't it?" Which is technically a question. It was like practically rhetorical, but it was technically a question. And she looks at me and goes, like totally blows me off and rolls her eyes, which was like a little dent to my ego that was greatly magnified by the fact that she was like probably in fourth grade. They were like on a field trip. And I was just like trying to be funny, like build a little bit of rapport. Yeah, not funny. That was one moment. I think there are times too where I'm trying to think of I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old right now. So you can imagine, like, I'm throwing out questions like, what is one thing life is teaching you right now, Otto? And he's like, blah, 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 and like keeps cutting with his scissors. So I'm sharing that as an example because I think there are sometimes where my curiosity is actually quite self-centered. And what I mean by that is I want to ask the question because I'm curious to know, but I think a good, powerful question is actually empathetic enough to come from the person. So if I was Otto, cutting, my 5-year-old cutting with scissors, I would probably think, what would be a fun question for Otto to be asked right now? But instead, I'm just like, well, I want to have a deep conversation with my son. It's like, he doesn't care. He's 5, right? And so deep for him, what matters to him right now is play.
Yeah.
And so my questions, like when my head is screwed on straight, have shifted to like, do you think unicorns can also use scissors, right? That's maybe a much more empathetic for Otto with where he's at.
Yeah, it means that not every questions need to be a deep questions. It's also depend on the situation where you are and with who you are talking to. I mean, my daughter is 23 and sometimes I try to deepen the conversation and then I get in return, oh, Mama, you and your grade. Yeah, you know.
I think, and just because someone isn't ready for a question doesn't mean we shouldn't ask them. I would also highlight, this feels like a good place to maybe parse out deep. So let's do a breakdown of how I think of the word like a deep question or a light question. For me, it has zero to do with the content of the question. And what I mean by that is I believe that you could have a conversation that really matters and might make a difference and create a lasting connection. And it could be about the weather or about what somebody does or about what they did that weekend or anything else. And so what matters then, and which is equally editable, is the process that we go about. And so when I ask that question, am I genuinely curious and have their best interest in mind? Or do I just selfishly really want to connect with this person?
Yeah.
It's a very nuanced difference, but it changes the way a question lands quite a lot. So, an example I would offer, stick with what is life teaching you right now. If you rolled up to a bus stop, looked at a stranger and said, hi, what is one thing life is teaching you right now? This is like not a recommended life strategy, not a good way to build a relationship of trust, right?
What do you want from me?
Yeah. However, if I walked up to the bus, if you gave me that challenge of you have to build a relationship of trust with a stranger and you have to do it by asking this question, if I had to do that, I might walk up to the bus stop and I might get really clear about my intent and bring them into that intention. And so I might say, hey, I realize this is odd and bus stops are usually this place where we isolate and don't talk. And I'm kind of doing some experimentation in what happens when we ask questions we typically don't. Could I toss out kind of a big question and see if it sparks an interesting conversation? And then by sharing my intent, I am seeking their consent. So here's my intention. I get your consent, either yes or no. And if you say yes, then we're choosing to play the same game. And I can toss out what is one thing life is teaching you right now, and it will land very differently. You know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but I think it's to make it like abundantly salient is useful. Okay.
Yeah, but this is really something that I also recognize in my job, that if I want to ask a specific question, you need to introduce the question that you will ask so that they are prepared and that they understand why you ask, sometimes. Yeah.
And I think, so intention makes the why really clear. And I also think that genuine natural curiosity is pretty disarming. Not entirely disarming, because people may still wonder like, well, why are you curious about that? But there was a moment I was on a bus in Boston. So this like cold airport bus, packed with people, but dead silent. And I just kind of had this thought of like, if I could build a relationship of trust on this bus, you could probably do it anywhere else. Because this was one of the coldest, most unwelcoming environments in one of the typically colder and more unwelcoming cities in the world. And I looked down and there was a guy sitting next to me who had a baseball hat on. And it just said the Jason Project. And I looked down and I just asked, hey, I'm super curious. So there's a bit of intention. Super curious. What's the Jason Project all about? And it was like I flipped a light switch. And he turned on and like the bus in that little region started to glow, and he just went on and on about the Jason Project and how he worked with Robert Ballard, the guy who discovered the Titanic. And like it totally. Now, is it possible that I could have asked that exact same question about somebody else's hat and got an eye roll? Yes.
Yeah.
And it happens. And I don't think that that's a good enough reason not to ask. I think that part of this idea of being a facilitator is that part of the job of being a responsible expert facilitator or connector is that you assume and take on the social risk for others to create conversations that actually make a difference. And so you do and say things that others may be too afraid to do and say, so that you can accelerate a process and jump into a conversation that otherwise would not have happened.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is really the beauty of our job, and to learn the skill to ask the questions, to learn the thing to bring, to see when can I ask, when can I allow myself also to be a little bit disruptive sometimes and ask some provoking questions. And yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. Ask me a question.
Your daughter's 23?
Yeah.
You said?
Yeah.
What have you learned about how to ask questions to teenagers and 23-year-olds?
I will tell you something. Every year when she has birthday, and she will have birthday on 25 this week on Friday, she will turn 23. Every year on her birthday in the morning at 8, she got a call and she knew that. And I explained to her how she was born, how difficult it was and everything. And at the end of my talk, that is like 10 minutes, she told me, yeah, now I know what you will tell me. You was never the mother of a 23-year-old daughter. So this year you will learn how to go with me and how to support me on my way. And you tell me that since I'm a child. So my answer, Chad, is every year I learn more about how to be a good mother. And I do this since 23 years. And every year there are new things that I discover.
Make me want to cry. That is so beautiful.
You cannot know. You cannot know. I mean, your children are 3 and 5, you told me. So you already see the difference between a 2 years old and a 5 years old. And then you see the difference between 5 and 8. And then there is another big difference, depending on if it's a girl or a boy, between 12 and 15. And then, so you learn every day. I don't know.
Can I tell you, have you ever come across Peter Block and his work? He wrote a book called Community. He's a big organizational development guru. I wrote the book Flawless Consulting. Anyway, Peter's about 84 now, and I was having lunch with him, and I asked him if he had any regrets. And he said, I don't have regrets. I don't have time for that. But if I could go back as a parent, I wish that I would, I don't know if he used this exact language, but he was like, I wish I would have driven my kids around less like a joystick, like I was steering them and guiding them. And I wish that I was just more curious about them. And I feel like your story, what a beautiful routine. Every year at 8 a.m.
Every year she gets the same thing. She goes all through her birth, how painful it was, how beautiful it was. Do you know the Gilmore Girls? I don't know if you don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we are the same. So I was a single mother. So we are very, very close to each other. And this is the same game every year. But enough about me. I have a few questions. So
Yeah. Hit me.
Our listeners are, most of them, facilitators, and I guess also learning and development people. And you told me just before, that you describe your mission, as gently eradicating small talks. For facilitators, those early moments in a session can make or break group energy. So how do you shift from surface level comfort to meaningful connection in your sessions? I know you have these great cards. I know also the cards of Jan Keck that I really like.
Love Jan.
But what would be your advice to start and connect with people?
So let's drop into a scenario that is, I think, familiar to lots of facilitators or people in learning and development, which is you have a group walk into a room that was probably asked or forced to be there by their boss. And so in that context, one of the things that I've just learned over the years is the people that I talk to and build a little relationship of trust with before the session actually starts. So they're just walking in and I'm following up. Instead of messing with a computer in the front of the room or doing some logistical thing or just being nervous if I actually walk up to people, look them in the eye, say hi, greet them, ask them about their work, their job. If I do that, an hour later, if I ask for people to stand up and share, to be vulnerable, or to offer a response that's kind of a higher level thinking, 98 out of 100 times, it will be one of those people that I talked with before the session started. It's like not even like, doesn't even like increase increase engagement later. Like in my experience, if you build a relationship of trust with someone by being curious about them and also remembering that a conversation without self-disclosure is an interrogation. So I'm also sharing back with them because that also sets can set people at ease as well. So 98 out of 100 times, right? I know that those will be some of the first people to jump up and share. So now the question is, which you've asked, how? And here's what I would say in the too long didn't read version of the first couple chapters of Ask Powerful Questions. It could be broken down into notice, wonder, and inquire. So the first part, sometimes we forget to do. When people walk into a room, even if they haven't said anything, the conversation has already started. And what I mean by that is when they walk into the room, they are telling you a whole bunch because they put clothes on their body that they chose to put on because they knew they were going to be out in public. They put particular jewelry on. Maybe they're bringing with them a bag. They are maybe coming in with somebody else. Perhaps they're coming in with a demeanor that is like, I don't want to be here. Or they're coming in with a demeanor of, thank goodness I don't have to work today. Whatever that is, right? All of that is things that they already told you before you exchange a single word. And so noticing that and then wondering about it. So if two people walk in together, I am noticing that they walked in together. I wonder how they know each other. And then step 3, I'm just simply walking up and inquiring, hey, I noticed you two came in together looking thick as thieves. If you're familiar with that idiom, right? It looks like you're close. And so I'm curious, how do you know each other? How'd you meet each other? Or so how do you know each other would be a very like level 1 response. I like asking questions that are a bit more specific and might create novelty that they may not have been asked. And so I might, in particular, I'd be naturally curious about, it looks like you know each other quite well. I'm curious, how did you first meet? And that's going to bring them back. If they've known each other for 10 years, they probably haven't rehashed that moment or that story, but it will create something lovely and actually new for them to reflect on that in that moment. And it will also be a connection with the three of us. But noticing, then wondering, then inquiring. That's without the cards, right? From a facilitator, this is like the unofficial start as people are just rolling in. I
love that.
That's one.
It's, I love that. This is something when I teach facilitation, I say, if you want to get remembered by people, or if you want people to trust you, or I think the better way to catch the people is on a personal or emotional level. So it's like really caring and really asking something that you're really curious about and that they will be happy that someone asked them, for example.
Let me offer a beautiful nuance here.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between, like, pick out a random WeConnect card just off my desk. So there's a difference between walking up to somebody and just saying, hey, what are you passionate about right now? It's like that question is far more risky than how did you two meet? Because this question isn't in the room. I am bringing that question in. And so it like catches people off guard. Whereas the first step, notice, the most disarming thing about the noticing what what is around you, what you're seeing in the environment, what they're already presenting, sharing, carrying, wearing, etc. When I notice about that, it's something that is pretty darn safe because it's obvious right in front of our eyes. We can notice it, and we're not bringing something else outside of that context or environment. Now, the magic of that is typically what is present in the space is like a very short path to something very real. So take the Jason project, for example.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm curious, what's the Jason project all about? Very safe because I noticed it was in the environment. He knew he was going to put a hat on that day and go out in public, but it also connected to a core part of his identity and who he was. So in one or two questions, we were talking about his identity, who he was, and what he was most passionate about, but it was safe because it was accessed through something I could see. And that, for me, that's the nuances. Like if it's not in the environment, some facilitators will bring in, they're like, oh, my favorite question right now is what brings you joy? So somebody comes into the room right now and they say, hey, I'm just curious, what brings you joy? It's like, this is not what I would recommend. What I might recommend is saying, hey, it looks like you're like really happy coming in right now. What's bringing you that joy? Do you see that? Like very subtle difference, but very important difference. One can be like somebody eye rolling, didn't really feel like I connected. Yeah. And one can actually create a relevant and more safe connection.
Yeah, no, it's true. Looking what is happening in the room when they are coming in. Yeah, very good tips. Do you use your WeConnect card in every of your session?
Do I use them in every one of my sessions?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, 99 out of 100 times. And part of that is like over the last few years, a majority of the work that I've been doing is large group facilitation. And so doing a question swap, which I frame as a science experiment in what happens when we don't ask questions we typically do. And so I run it like a science experiment. So I actually do a round control group. And I said, just so you know, like this is not a life recommendation. I'm not teaching you anything right now. This is not an icebreaker. We're actually literally just doing a science experiment. We're in the Petri dish right now. You all have questions on your table. Pair up, ask the person a question on your card. They'll ask you a question on their card. At the end of that, you're going to swap cards and toss your hand in the air, signaling that you're looking for somebody new. So it's a self-facilitating, beautiful self-swapping question swap. And I interrupt them after about 10 minutes and say, okay, you're all like laughing and smiling and having good conversations with each other. And you might have forgot. You're actually just in a science experiment right now. So I'm going to bring you back. And I want to just insert, like any good science experiment, we're going to edit a variable. And then we're going to do a round 2, a test group. And then we'll compare and I'll ask you and we'll debrief what struck you and what you notice about that. And you can see like part of this framing is becoming the professional arms uncrosser. Yeah. I've learned that working with 1,500 accountants who kind of don't really care about being at the thing, they do care about rational logic, data, etc. And so when I frame connection before content, and actually not just frame like make believe, but actually run it as a true experiment in what happens. And I debrief at the end and I ask them, what struck you? What'd you notice? What was the difference between round 1 and round 2? I'm inviting the analytical mind into the space of heart-filled connection.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like how you put it into context. I will do this myself. I will steal it.
Please.
So in your book, there is also a whole chapter about listening, because this is also a quality that we need to ask good, powerful questions, that we need also to learn how to listen. What's a time when listening, real, full-bodied listening, completely shifted the room or outcome of a group you were in? What made that moment possible?
The quantity of examples of that is probably much higher in my marriage than in my work. It's like the amount of times I remember sitting on a couch. We had just moved to a new city. We're sitting on a couch in our living room, and Kate, my wife, was going to share something. And in my tiny, puny male brain, I was thinking, I know what she's going to say. And so I jumped in and said, oh yeah. And I kind of like started to fill in. And she stopped me with great wisdom. And she stopped me and said, Chad, you are not listening right now to hear what I am going to say. You are listening as an act of love. Right. And I heard in that, she didn't say this, but at the end of that, I heard, so shh. And I think that I'm sharing that story as like a metaphor for most good listening. So I was sitting, I'll answer directly your question in a group that I was leading, but I was sitting on an airplane once and I ended up sitting down on the plane next to one of the head chaplains of the United States Space Force. So this anyway. And I mentioned somehow me and Kate's anniversary date. And he just listened and he asked another follow-up question and we just continued talking and it turned into this beautiful conversation over the course of 2 hours. At the very end of the plane ride, he told me that he and his wife have the same anniversary date as me and my wife. Now, any normal person, when I say our anniversary is August 18th,
would I say the same?
Would immediately jump in and say, oh, no way, me too. And this is the default way of listening, is we listen to relate. We listen to infuse ourselves into the conversation. We listen, focus on me, not focus on them. And so for the group, this is kind of a failure story, but one of the first bigger corporate gigs that I did was for an airline, JetBlue Airlines, and their learning and development team. And I had a sense that like the session was not going that good. And I just paused because it was like, I was nervous about the engagement because it was this was like 12 years ago. I was nervous about the gigs. It was one of the first bigger corporate gigs. And it was also not going well. And so that was wigging me out. And somehow, maybe thanks to my co-founders and co-facilitator at the time's help, Will Wise, we just paused and checked in and said, hey, and just reflected back, like, because what we were listening to was, I don't think this is actually going that well. And so the way we responded to that was by reflecting that back, just like you'd reflective listen in a one-to-one conversation. We reflected back and said, hey, we have a sense that this is maybe not what you're needing right now. And so can you just give me like on a scale of thermometer, like this is going really well, exactly what you need, to this is terrible, and somewhere in the middle. And the JetBlue Airlines has a pretty polite corporate culture. And they were all like thumbs in the middle, which is really like, this sucks. right? This is not working well. And then we were able to ask a follow-up about that. So anytime listening with a group, right, this is a very stealable technique, is anytime you do a thermometer check-in like that, which I've seen many, many facilitators do, but I haven't seen them tap into the magic of a second question, which is what could happen in the next hour that would move your thumb up a couple notches?
Mm-hmm.
You just have a chat with each other in groups of 3. What would move that thumb up a couple notches? And then popcorn those responses back out. And what they shared was, we're doing a little bit more sitting than we'd like to. Can we get up and actually experiment? We're like, absolutely. Skip a bit of content, jump up into more experiential facilitation. And it really worked for them. And the session went great. Somewhere there's a testimonial on our website from JetBlue, kind of turning that failure into something really useful.
Yeah. Good. You give so much gold tips here for us. So nice, so nice. So I have something. I have one question that has been prepared by Lynn Holtet. Yeah, she's a brilliant brain, and she has a lot of humor. And she asked me, "Oh, can you ask him?" There's that Einstein quote, whether or not he said it, about spending 55 minutes framing the question and 5 minutes solving the problem. So if you were facilitating a room of global change makers with nothing but your best questions and maybe a deck of WeConnect cards, what question would you give them to wrestle with for the next hour?
Ooh, my goodness, Lynn.
I told you, she's great.
She is great. So you're asking for a specific question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give you that, and then I'm going to give you like a repeatable philosophical answer too. So the question right now, I think I actually have it somewhere because I've finished the sequel to WeConnect cards, which is the future focused. I haven't.
You sent it to me, right?
Yeah. So the future focused WeConnect cards, which are
I want
created specifically to spark conversations to help people talk their way into tomorrow, and we'll be launching them in the fall along with the Connector Summit.
Nice.
So. Let me see if I can find, here it is. So I think I picked this question up from Peter Block, but the question I would offer.
What is the crossroads you are at, and what about that is important?
What is the crossroads you are at, and what about that is important? And the reason I'd invite people to wrestle with that is like, that question is beautifully personalized.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the crossroads that they are at, lots of autonomy in how they choose to answer that and which crossroads they might be at. It could be a crossroads, and Peter Block would even say, I don't care if it's a crossroads of which pair of pants to wear that day, or it's a crossroads of whether to switch careers, or a crossroads of whether to get married or not, or a crossroad, like these could be very big or very small crossroads. But and what about that is important. Maybe the real thing I would offer to Lynn is like, take any question that you want to ask a group and just add that last part. And what about that is important? And that little part just makes every question, takes it down one level deeper. So what brings you joy right now? And what about that is important? And what is life teaching you right now? And what about that is important? And so it just becomes this like infinitely magical second question that you can ask on repeat, because otherwise you run the risk of having a conversation and not actually ever connecting it to importance. Mm-hmm. And that part actually, what it does is it invites people to actually make it a take the responsibility and ownership to make it a conversation that matters in that moment. So yeah, what is crossroads? I also think this question has a high probability of helping people fall in love with each other. And I don't mean romantic love, but I mean, I think the impact that it can have is to actually let people, both their aspiration and their struggle all in the same moment. And so you get this lovely breadth of humanity all in a single question.
There is this study with, I don't know how much question. Is it 38?
36.
No. 36 questions to fall in love with someone. Oh, I should have checked in. This is a joke. No, but there is this study about the 36 questions you can ask to. I really think that people connect more if you go through these kind of questions where you show the different layers of your personalities and what you really think, the authentic thinking inside of yourself.
Can I offer my thoughts on that study?
Yeah, please tell me.
I would suggest.
I don't know the questions. I heard.
Yeah, I've seen the questions and I've gone through them and I'm curious about them. And if you go to our like free resources page on our website, you can download 36 free printable WeConnect cards. And what I think about that study is it's not actually about the content of those 36 questions. Those 36 questions, in my opinion, aren't like some perfect magical questions. It's actually the act of asking 36 whole questions and sitting down with one other person, purely focused on them, totally with the intent of listening. That experiment and that study also has you either begin and or end asking the 36 questions with 4 straight minutes of eye contact, where you're just looking at the other person, no words exchanged, just looking into the window of the soul, the eyes, for 4 full minutes. And I think that you could almost pick 36 questions at random. And like I said in the beginning, creating conversations that matter is not about the content of the conversation, it's about the process. And so I think that people fall in love with each other through those 36 questions because of the process of actually being that curious and that present with someone for such a sustained period of time, which just doesn't typically happen in a normal, like a first date out at a restaurant where there's lots of noise and you're present and you're kind of scattered around and it's different, right? Just like going through this sequence of...
True. But I will look at the questions because now I'm very curious about the question. But really, I do really think that the fact that intentional to sit with each other and really ask the questions to each other and waiting for the answer of the other, not is something that makes the magic of connecting with someone. Absolutely. Chad, thank you so much. I have a last question.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because I was so preparing this interview. What I normally never do, but I create like 5-3 questions and that's it with my English. And this time I was really like, oh my God, I have to prepare very good question. So if you could leave the entire world with just one question to sit with in silence, what would it be and why?
Maybe fitting based on our whole conversation, but it would be, what is one thing life is teaching you right now? And the reason is, Will, my late co-founder, used to say that the moment you stop learning is the moment you start dying. And he had cancer. And in the last 2 weeks I basically lived at his house for the last 2 weeks of his life as he was in home hospice. And he died with a book called Wake Up Grateful open on his desk halfway through reading it. And so as he is like in his final moments, he was still learning. And I hold this belief that right up until the moment he actually died, he didn't spend a minute dying because he was just constantly learning. Even in the midst of extreme pain, he was asking, what is this pain teaching me right now? And there's something that's so deep that for those of you that want to live a very full life, continue to ask that question. What is one thing life is teaching you right now?
You're the first guest who put tears in my eyes of emotions right now. So thank you. Thank you so much for that conversation. And I'm sure that this conversation matters. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I have a feeling those tears might be a hint that we stumbled on truth and created a conversation that might edit the future for you, I, or somebody else.
Absolutely. I wish you all the best. Continue please the video on YouTube so that you save my Friday evening.
Noted. I just scheduled my next date with my videographer. We'll keep the videos flowing.
Okay. Bye-bye, Chad. See you soon.
Thank you.